Horizon Chess, Home Siege Reaction. This is American pilot obliterates 5 enemy planes in 4 minutes. Edward Butch O'Hare. Sounds like a video game title, but no, it's real life. 4 minutes. I mean, okay, I don't know, man. I guess how is like dog fighting works in sky, right? Because if it's like something like a tank or armored vehicle, it would take a lot of hits, right? But on sky, like it's few bullets is enough to like like kill a plane, right? But then again, I've watched videos from Federation which talks about like a lot of bullet holes hitting a plane, but still not like dropping. I forgot the video of what video was that, but something like that. So I don't know. I guess it can happen, but I don't know. 5 enemy planes in 4 minutes. That would imply he was swarmed by those 5 enemy planes, and somehow still dodged and killed all of them, like a video game protagonist or something. That's the case with all Federation stories. They are all ridiculous video game style stories, but they are real story. Somehow nobody talks about it besides Federation. That's the one thing. Every time I'm like surprised by the title because I've never heard of it. Then I watch the whole video. It's an insane video, right? Insane story, and then nobody talks about it. Like, I don't get it. Obviously, some of the ones like the recent videos, like people have made movies about them, small movies, but however movies. It's not a major scale thing, which is insane. It's not like Hollywood and people don't like military stories or military things. They make it all the time, but they rather use some fictional shit than actual badass things like whatever Federation covers. This is gonna be something similar, I'm guessing. So let's watch it. Remember, if you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe. So that way you can help this channel by helping the algorithm. I've watched many different type of videos, but recently I've been watching military style videos a lot. I don't know, but then again, like I do video game reactions, history reactions. I don't know when I did the history reaction last time. We have something like science reaction. So I do different type of reactions. It's like YouTube algorithm doesn't like that. So the more engagement a video gets, the more channel, the more channel can be helped, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, let's do this one.
Start researching for a video and the truth ends up getting in the way of a good story. Luckily, this is a good story regardless. Today we're talking about America's first naval ace of World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Butch O'Hare. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Delete Me.
Finally.
Is that a CMMG Descent?
Come find out.
Guys, I gotta go. Well, actually, hold on. What's it chambered in?
It's 300 blackout.
Yeah, I gotta go. Sorry about that. Anyways, Delete Me is super straightforward. You give them money, they make sure that all your personal information isn't being sold on the internet by data brokers. You see, data brokers are legally required to stop selling your information if you submit an opt-out request. However, submitting an opt-out request is different for every different data broker firm, and they make it as difficult as possible, and Delete Me does all of it for you automatically. Then, after they do delete all your information from data brokers, they continue to monitor all of those data brokers in case your information does get relisted again. They will automatically take it down again. I like Delete Me a lot. It's a service that I actually use. I also just got my wife signed up for it a couple of months ago. As you can see here, they checked for 142 different data brokers and 80 of them had her personal information, and they show us what information that they had. So if you wanted to give it a try, we'll have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video. Now, our story actually begins with his father. So, once upon a time in 1893, Edward Joseph O'Hare, EJ for short, was born in St. Louis, Missouri as the son of 2 first-generation Americans that had just come over from Ireland. He spent his entire childhood in St. Louis, and then in 1912, he would meet his wife Selma. They would end up getting married, and then they would live in an apartment above a grocery store that was owned by Selma's father. Shortly after that, in 1914, Selma would give birth to their first child, Edward O'Hare, that would later come to be known as Butch. Butch would also get 2 little sisters, Marilyn and Patricia, and by all accounts, they had a really happy little family. Okay, fast forward 1923, EJ takes the Missouri State Bar, he passes it, becomes a lawyer, and almost immediately gets this new client by the name of Owen P. Smith, and he is the commissioner of the Greyhound Racing Association for the entire nation. And he needs a lawyer because he needs to patent his new invention, that little electric rabbit that goes around the dog racing track that all the dogs chase. So EJ gets that done for him, and then Owen decides that he wants to keep him around, so he makes him a business partner because he needs a good lawyer that's going to be able to help him keep dog tracks open and open up new new dog tracks because at this point in time, dog tracks received a ton of political resistance. And this is because in 1910, gambling got outlawed, so for the next decade, all the dog tracks were just going out of business because without the gambling revenue coming in, the business just wasn't financially viable. And I mean, nobody wants to go just watch dogs run in a circle if you're not betting money on it, right? Ipso facto, all the dog tracks ended up shutting down except for the ones that were willing to engage in underground illegal gambling, which is why they needed a good lawyer like EJ. But before EJ even passed the bar and became a lawyer in 1923, things were already set into motion that would eventually change that. You see, 1920 was Prohibition when the government banned alcohol. Okay, sidebar. The amount of videos that I have done on this channel and my other channel, The Fat Files, where everything ties back to Prohibition is absolutely insane. It's like that game, you know, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where every single person on the planet knows Kevin Bacon within 6 relationships. I can do any historical event and tie it back to Prohibition somehow, in some way, in some fashion. I know it's possible.
Take a look at this. Jesus Christ. That right?
I mean, just off the top of my head from videos that I've already
Yeah, roaring 20s, like that prohibition and all that, it's so insane. Like, yeah, it has a ripple effect and like connects to everything. It feels like 20s are the cursed. We are in 20s now, and look at what every shit. 20s started with COVID and all the wars popped up. It feels like 20s are always cursed.
covered, Prohibition is directly responsible for Domino's not going bankrupt in 2012, every American warship having an ice cream machine on it, that time that America had multiple ships completely dedicated to just making ice cream and distributing it to the Pacific Theater in World War II, the fact that there's 7 billion pounds of cheese in underground caves all over America, the fact that every dairy farmer is required by law to pay into a giant advertising fund so that they can...
Yeah, and we can also, like, maybe this is a first stretch, but in the 20s, Germany started to starve itself, right? Because of like post-World War One limitation and all the shit, right? So basically this will create, nationalism that will lead to like Hitler, basically, right? All the collapse of money, like bread costing ridiculous money, people selling their houses just to eat bread. All the shit will start to happen in 20s. 20s are just cursed. That's what it is, right? I feel like when the 2030 comes, things will start to get better. That's how cursed 20s are.
Advertise milk, which is where got milk came from. Pretty much all the IRS codes regarding tax evasion, and now this story as well is also brought to you by Prohibition, that one time that the US government tried to ban alcohol and failed miserably. Now, as we all know, after alcohol got banned, organized crime stepped in. They started distributing alcohol, they established speakeasies, they had bootleggers, they manufactured their own booze, and they made a ton of money while they did it. And by 1925, they had gotten so wealthy and so powerful that they were actually able to buy off politicians and law enforcement, and they were able to get away with whatever they wanted, and they were looking for more ways to make even more money, whether it was legal or not. And one of the things they decided that they wanted to do...
Bootleggers, right? Just like amping up their cars just to evade cops. That old looking cars, like 20s, basically, like cars have been around like for like a decade or two at best, right? But decent enough, like, I don't even know what to call it decent, but like decent car a decade. Like invention, it's been like 2 decades by now. But they basically just amped up the power and horsepower, like tuning became a thing, right? Because of Prohibition, like everybody's like gangster tried to run away. That basically started NASCAR in the first place. And basically these are the thing why like muscle car become a thing eventually as well.
It was to get into gambling via dog racing tracks, and now that they had politicians on their payroll, they would actually be able to get the building permits, build all new dog racing tracks, and not be busted for gambling by the law enforcement because they were paying off them too. So you're a big-time mobster that wants to get involved in dog racing, money's not going to be an issue, getting building permits from politicians isn't going to be an issue, and the law enforcement's going to leave you alone. What's the last thing you need? You need somebody that knows how to run a dog racing track and one of those stupid electric rabbit things, right? Right. So that's what they do. The mobsters go and they get a hold of Owen Smith and his legal consigliere, E.J. O'Hare. And when I say mobsters, I just mean the first big-time guy to figure all this out and put the plan together, and that was a gentleman from Chicago by the name of Al Capone. Yeah, E.J. and Owen are now partnered.
I'm not gonna lie. Like, if you don't know that, it's just like, you don't know anything about that era. I instantly knew, like, where this is going. Like, that's why Al Capone became what he was. Because he was kind of like the first one.
With Scarface.
Definitely looks suspicious. And his Southern Italian heritage raises some flags.
Using Capone's connections, they end up building dog tracks in Chicago, Miami, and Boston, and they make a ton of money. And this goes on for years, and EJ ends up earning his new nickname from the mob, Easy Eddie. And back at the O'Hare house, they go from, you know, doing pretty okay financially to being very wealthy very quickly. And despite EJ, Easy Eddie, dad, being in bed with the mafia and working with Al Capone, when he's back home, by all accounts, he is a terrific father to all three of his kids and a great husband to his wife. But Butch, his son, is the absolute apple of his eye. They have a really special relationship. Using all this new money he has, he goes up, he takes him camping, teaches him how to shoot guns, and then he even gets into flying airplanes, loves taking Butch up into the airplane with him, and sometimes even letting him take control of the plane, and Butch falls in love with both flying and shooting guns. And this goes on for years, being a bad guy for a living and being a good dad back at home. So fast forward 1927, Owen P. Smith ends up passing away. Now, since his business partner just
You have no idea how many gangsters and like criminals generally like are good to their families. Not all of them, obviously, like your nature sometimes overwhelms you, but people try to like correct the balance that way. If you're like, you know, like criminal and doing like questionable things normally, so you're gonna be like really good at home, like, you know, with your family and things, like trying to give back to church or something. There are people who like try to do balance.
passed away, he acquires the business and the patent to the electric rabbit, and this is where things get a little controversial depending on which source you want to read. Some sources imply that he swindled Owen's widow out of the patent and out of the money, and some other sources say that he basically paid her out. Which, to be fair, both of those are completely possible. He is a crooked lawyer working for the mafia, and also it's pretty standard practice that if you are in a business partnership and your partner passes away, that you buy out his shares and you acquire the entire business.
Knowing lawyers, I think he did both. Right? He probably didn't pay as much as he would have. He probably paid much less, but still paid. So it's just like he's in clear. So he probably did both.
So you can go ahead and pick whichever one you like more for that. Now, it's also at this point in time, right around 1927, that Easy Eddie and his wife Selma come to the realization that their son Butch is adapting a little bit too well to their new life of luxury. I mean, they have enough money to give their kids anything they want. The problem with Butch is all he wants is to sit in the house, read books, and eat donuts 3 times a day. He's 13 years old, and he's already starting to get fat and kind of lazy, and one day he reaches peak laziness when he asks his mother at the age of 13, "Hey mom, can I borrow the car to go to the bakery?"
Yeah, what an a-hole, right? Just want to read books and eat donuts. In today's world, that already makes him like, oh, wait a minute, you're like different, you're a bit smart, you want to read books. Obviously, back then, like, yeah, books were the things you like, I don't know, comics, books, novels, whatever. But yeah, in today, if anybody's just like, oh, my son, he's a deadbeat, he only reads books at the age of like, in early teens. He just reads book and eat donuts. We're like, yeah, it's not so bad now.
Bakery is literally 4 doors down.
At least he's not on the internet.
Donuts. He didn't want to walk like 60 feet to go get a box of donuts so he could eat it. At that point, his parents realized that they had a problem on their hands. So they do what any good parents would do. They come to him with love and compassion, and they hold his hand, and they look deeply into his eyes, and they tell him, it's okay. I'm just fucking kidding. They sent his ass straight to military school.
It's a fat kid.
Yeah, his 1920s.
So he gets shipped off to Western Military Academy in Illinois. Fast forward 3 years, 1930, Butch is in his junior year of military school, and he absolutely loves it. He's not much for conventional sports like football or wrestling. However, he did end up joining the water polo team, which he really enjoyed, and that's actually how he got his nickname Butch. And he has decided not only does he enjoy military school, but he wants to go on to be in the actual military. He wants to go directly into the U.S. Naval Academy. So that's what Butch is up to. Easy Eddie's still just raking in the dirty gambling money with Al Capone, so much so that in 1930, he buys a massive mansion that has an indoor skating rink and an indoor pool in this really fancy neighborhood in St. Louis. And this is the part where the truth kind of gets in the way of a good story, because when this story is usually told, there hasn't been all this context that I've already given you guys. It's literally just they open up like, hey, there was this lawyer that worked for the mafia and Al Capone. His name was Easy Eddie, and he was the best lawyer around, and he's the reason that Al Capone got kept out of prison, okay? Which, right out of the gate, that's not true, okay? Easy Eddie wasn't Al Capone's lawyer. He happened to be a lawyer that was a business associate of Al Capone, okay? If Al Capone got arrested for a DUI or whatever, it wasn't like he was calling up Easy Eddie to come represent him in court. That never happened. They then go on to explain that him and his son Butch have this amazing relationship, and Butch is the apple of his eye, and he uses the wealth that he's accrued from working with the mafia to give his son everything he could possibly want. And then one day he has a change of heart and realizes that he hasn't given his son a good role model in life to look up to. And at that moment, he decided that he was going to help the IRS put Al Capone in prison, proving to his son how how to be a good person, and then the mafia assassinates him for it. And then his son, having seen his father lay down his life to do the right thing, decides that he's going to go off and become a war hero in World War II, and it's this happy story about redemption and doing the right thing, and it's also completely fucking made up and nonsensical. Okay, that story sounds great if Butch is like a 7-year-old little boy. He's
Wait a minute, is that the story people tell? Because everything like Ferguson said from the start of the video, that's like such a spin. But then again, that happens way too much time, right? I've grown up now. Like I'm at my 30, right? I'm 30 years old right now. I research shit a lot, especially what things happening around the world, right? One of the reasons I started Reaction Channel because I'm like, I like to know things, right? So I see certain stories that have been told, even in like something like John Oliver, right? When John Oliver covers something that I already kind of know about and like researched it a lot, and realize like how he's like skipping over things. The same thing with the other media as well, like CNN and Fox News, all sides. Like they mold the story in a way. I don't know if it's their fault or they didn't research it right, but it just story gets molded in a way like that's not really the truth, right? It's not really a lie, but it's just like molded just the way here, right? Just the way story told, like, oh, Al Capone's lawyer. Not really lawyer. He was just like with business with him. He wasn't the lawyer of Al Capone, but no, just like he was a lawyer. He was with Al Capone, so he was Al Capone's lawyer. Like, what the fuck?
He's not. He's 17 and he's been in military school since he was 13 and he's already about to go into the U.S. Naval Academy, okay?
Not to mention, because he was slacking and just like eating donuts, his parents literally like put him into boarding school, military boarding school. That's how he got there. Not that he suddenly just realized like this is my life missions and whatever shit like that.
You know how fucking mad I would be if my dad that I had a great relationship with, like one of my best friends that I confided in at the age of 17, and he came to me and was like, son, I've done some pretty bad things in my life and I've decided to prove to you how to be a good man. I'm going to go ahead and turn myself in and get myself assassinated by the mob just to show you how to do the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, hey, dad, counteroffer, hear me out. What if you just retired, you're already rich, and then you just stopped doing bad stuff? That would set a pretty good example. I'm also 17, so I don't need you to just like set the example. I'm old enough and mature enough to understand the concept of like, hey, do as I say, not as I do, you know? Maybe don't go get yourself killed, basically.
Yeah, this is so good because you hear the, do good life, stories about in movies and like Marvel stories and that are so black and white and linear, right? That's not how life works, right? There are many elements. If anybody follows something like that, and if like real story does turn out to be something like that, you think like, what a stupid idiot, right? Like he said, like if that guy actually had done all that, his son would be like, what are you, fucking moron? You could have chose 5 other routes than doing that shit. Like, how did that help anyone? It's very linear, but it's just like, oh, good, that's it, like black and white, that's type of mentality. That shit never happens in real life, and it shouldn't, because things are more complex. I mean, there's like, you need to think about things more. It's not just like always some kind of a story that you can think of, right? So every time you see a certain Hollywood movie here and there, right, about like do good, little do good type of story about just simply like I did this to show my son and just like does something stupid. It's like that shit never happens in real life.
Basically for no reason.
This city wept. We lost 2 heroes.
Wasn't even an awning in their direction.
No, I know.
Jumped 20 stories. Doesn't make sense, does it?
So again, that's complete nonsense fairy tale land. Not only is it not historically supported, it also doesn't even make sense if you understand people even a little bit.
Yes,
okay, so
seriously.
here's what actually happened. In 1930, Easy Eddie does start working with the IRS because he's running all the dog tracks, he's helping Al Capone cook the books, and basically launder all the money, and he's going to be able to show the IRS how he's doing it, which is going to be able to allow them to put Al Capone in prison for tax evasion. Now, from here, there's another myth that honestly I also don't buy, but basically they insinuate that Easy Eddie actually helped the feds put away Al Capone in exchange for guaranteeing that his son, Butch O'Hare, got into the U.S. Naval Academy. Okay, and again, I don't know where this myth came from. I don't know why people believe this. There's almost no historical evidence that supports it, and if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense, okay? The U.S. Naval Academy has like a 10 to 12% acceptance rate, and Butch O'Hare just spent the last 5 years in one of the most prestigious military academies in the United States, and he performed well there. He's pretty much guaranteed a slot at the U.S. Naval Academy at this point. And we know how he performed once he got into the U.S. Naval Academy, and there was nothing that even remotely suggested that he didn't belong there. So, if he was going to get in anyways, why on earth would Easy Eddie go get Al Capone turned in and get himself killed for no reason? So, what do I think happened? I think that it was 1930 and Elliot Ness and his crew of uncorruptible cops known as the Untouchables were going around putting all the mobsters in jail, and Al Capone was number one on their list, and Easy Eddie, being the intelligent guy that he was, realized that if they got Al Capone, and then they would just start working their way down the ladder, and they would eventually get to him too. So he figured, hey, maybe I should help them get Al Capone, and then I'll get my own freedom instead. Now, in addition to this, to be fair to the myth that I did just try to debunk, it would not...
Yeah, way too many things happen that's not gonna make the news. Maybe Elliot Ness had something over him, right? The lawyer, right? Maybe something happened and they just made a deal that never made public, right? And this is like back then. In today's world where like everything gets leaked, even in today's world, things happens in the background that people will never know about, right? Things are not always simple like that, right? In reality, many things are happening in the background that might be like questionable or morally questionable. Because like I said, nothing is complete black and white, right? Even at the larger scale, right? Geopolitics at the global scale, shit is happening in the background that might not be, if people knew about, people would be pissed off. But it happens. And if that doesn't happen, like things are not going to move forward. So things don't always make the news, right? So who knows, something like that happened. Like Elliot Ness probably had some kind of like a leverage over a lawyer or something. They just made a deal or something.
Surprise me if there was some portion of this conversation where Easy Eddie was like, hey, I'm willing to be your guys' informant. My son is applying for the U.S. Naval Academy. If for some reason that it gets brought up that his dad is a famous mafia guy that works for Al Capone, and that is going to prevent him from getting in for that reason alone, I need you guys to tell them that I don't actually work for the mafia anymore and I'm working for you as an informant. That
yeah, maybe Elliot Ness himself probably threatened him indirectly. Like, yeah, your son is going to military school. Yeah, I could pass information that his father is this, and something like that. Leverage type, like that shit happens all the time.
And my son gets what he deserves. Okay, that is a very, very big difference between he got his son in by turning in Al Capone and he got out of his son's way, while also saving his own skin, which was probably his primary goal to begin with. Regardless, Al Capone gets arrested and put in jail for tax evasion in 1931. Then in 1932, Butch sets off for the U.S. Naval Academy. While attending the academy, Butch does a great job and goes back home every chance he gets to hang out with his mom, his dad, and his two sisters. Now, right around this time, Easy Eddie and Selma end up getting a divorce, and Easy Eddie actually moves to Chicago so he can be closer to the racetrack that he's running. Okay, fast forward 1937, Butch graduates from the Naval Academy and he decides that he wants to go off to become a pilot. Here's the problem: you can't just go off to become a pilot right after becoming a commissioned officer after graduating from the academy. You have to serve a minimum of 2 years in the Naval Surface Fleet, so he sets off to do that, serving his 2 years on the battleship, the USS New Mexico. So he does that for the next 2 years while dad is back home running the dog tracks in Chicago. Then 1939 rolls around. He's done his 2 years worth of time in the Surface Fleet. He applies to get into Naval Aviation School and he gets accepted. And right as he is about to ship off to go become a pilot, he receives word that his father has been murdered on November 8th, 1939. Easy Eddie had just left his office at the dog track in Chicago and was driving home, and when he pulled up to a stoplight, 2 armed gunmen got out with 12-gauge shotguns and opened fire on him inside of his car. Eddie tried to escape, but he was shot multiple times and ended up veering off and crashing into a light pole, and he would pass away almost immediately from his wounds. Now, technically, we don't actually know who killed Eddie. This is considered a cold case. However, pretty much everybody agrees that it was the mafia because he was assassinated approximately 1 week before Al Capone was set to get out of prison from the tax evasion charges that Eddie helped with in the first place. So everybody just kind of assumed that this was Al Capone's gift for getting out of prison. Now, going back to my original anger with the oversimplified version of this story from blogs and newspapers and magazines and other YouTube videos, when they tell the story, it's like Easy Eddie helps turn in Al Capone and then he is assassinated for it. They fail to mention that he's assassinated like 9 years later, okay, which I feel is kind of an important detail. Okay, setting that aside, Butch takes emergency leave, he comes back home, he buries his father, and this is obviously extremely hard to do because that's his dad that died, but to make it even worse, the newspaper and the media is dragging his father, and by extension his entire family, completely through the mud. You gotta remember, this is the 1930s, the anti-mafia sentiment is at an all-time high, and because of this, the newspapers and the law enforcement hype anything up they possibly can to make the American public feel safer. They want them to feel like the war against organized crime is being won, and in this case, they hyped up Eddie to be something a lot more than he was.
So basically, how shit is happening even in today. So that's the thing. Every time you see the past, it doesn't feel that far off from today. I mean, obviously, like today can be like more extreme because that's what happens when you're like information becomes free. Internet has changed things more ways than you would realize. But you can see similarities even back then. That shit happens today as well, right? News doing more than what it should do by molding things. That's so fucked up.
This is where the myth that Easy Eddie was the mastermind criminal genius lawyer that kept the entire mafia at a prison came from. That's how the media portrayed him after his death. And did Easy Eddie do some bad stuff? Yeah, absolutely. He enabled the mafia to make money from illegal gambling at dog racing tracks, and he made a bunch of money in the process as well. However, at no point was he the evil mastermind that was keeping Al Capone and all the mobsters out of jail. And having the newspapers vilify him to that degree was devastating to Butch and his family. I mean, yeah, he did some bad things.
I mean, Al Capone had fingers and everything. Eddie was one of those things, right? Judging from whatever I heard. He just had like some dog ring, whatever, like gambling thing going on. That's about it, right? He wasn't some like hitman from Al Capone or something. He wasn't killing people left and right or something like that. He was just that, right? Business with Al Capone like that, where it's just like some kind of a gambling ring with the dog racing. That's it. Still fucked up, still criminal, but not at the level people would automatically assume, oh, he was the guy with Al Capone. It's like, when you say like he was guy with Al Capone, you just automatically assume somebody at big level. Because somebody wouldn't just, he was the lawyer of Al Capone, like what the fuck, right? He was the guy who kept Al Capone doing this. Like, basically, people start to think like he was a right-handed guy of Al Capone or something. People suddenly assume something like that. Because Al Capone was so big. You don't just hang around Al Capone or something. If you do that, maybe you're like too big of a gangster. But that's not really the case, is it?
Things, but he was a great dad to them, and from their perspective, he probably did those bad things to provide for his family. Whether that's right or wrong is a different conversation, but to them,
wrong.
He was still their hero. He was a great...
Right, not everybody's criminal, right? Everybody has family. So, it's not really much of an excuse that I did this for providing my family. Other people have family too. They are providing without being criminal. So, let's ignore, he was a criminal, sure, but not at the level people are portraying.
Guy in their eyes. Not only did they have to deal with the emotional and mental stress of that, but they were also starting to get treated different by their community because now the entire community was looking down on them because Easy Eddie was apparently this evil criminal mastermind, and all the money they have and all the fancy cars and the big house was clearly blood money, and now nobody liked the family either. At this point in time, it would appear that the last name O'Hare was forever going to be associated with the mafia and looked down upon forever. Now, I don't know this for sure because Butch never wrote about it, so I can't truly know his intentions. However, putting myself in his situation, I have to assume that he felt like his dad was in fact a good guy that was driven to do bad things for the right reason. Being in Butch's shoes, that's his dad, it was his best friend, it was his hero. Realizing that his dad had done horrible things to put Butch in the advantageous position that he was in now, having gone through military school, having graduated...
I feel like what he would be feeling at the time, first of all, there would be confusion somewhat. Or mostly would be defense, right? If you like seen your father as like this kind of like a hero figure, doesn't matter what the outcome is, like doesn't matter what you discover, you will have some form of defensive mind, right? People are like saying bad thing about your father, you try to defend that in your head, right? Even if you accept like, oh, he was a criminal, you try to defend that as well. So I think defensive thing, probably that was his mood. At the same time also being somewhat confused, I guess, because probably didn't see that coming.
The U.S. Naval Academy, and now being headed off to flight school, Butch couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. His dad had become a villain so that Butch had the opportunity to become a hero. So Butch does the only thing he can do. He goes back out to flight school. While there, he does okay in the classroom. He's not the best at taking written tests, but when it comes to actually getting Butch inside the planes, he is exceptional. He is one of the best pilots they've ever seen, and he's even better at gunnery. This guy can put rounds on target with his eyes closed. He graduates from flight school in May of 1940, then he gets stationed on the USS Saratoga, an aircraft carrier with VF-3. Okay, now at this point, we gotta remember it's early 1940, World War II has officially started, but America is not directly involved yet. That being said, pretty much everybody in the military is aware that America is going to be involved soon, and they are training extra hard to get ready for that, as well as training as many new recruits as possible. So all of America's best warfighters at this point in time...
I mean, obviously they're gonna think like they're gonna do this. Basically World War I version 2, right? Because in World War I, Germany was the Axis, right? Eventually they had to get involved, but by that point war was over. World War II even more intensified. Now there's a singular figure with certain ideology, That wasn't the case with World War One. World War Two is even much worse now, right? Even before it started, probably people start to think about this like this is based on ideologies, right? Whenever like ideologies gets involved, like extremism can rise, right? People have motivation that they wouldn't have any other way, right? So in World War Two, people already realized like, okay, Germany single-handedly like dominating Europe like that. So they realized that yeah, eventually we'll have to get involved. So they were preparing basically.
Are pretty much sent in to go train as many new guys as possible. And the man in charge of VF3 to get all these new guys trained up and ready for war is a legendary pilot by the name of John Thatch. And this man is a complete badass. He is basically Maverick from Top Gun, except in the 1930s and 40s.
Look at that
this
face,
guy
like
was
I know
training
stuff.
all the new guys that came through VF3. And it was his standard practice to take the best, cockiest new pilots they had, and he would take them up into the air in F4F Wildcats and have a mock dogfight with them. And he would allow the cocky new guy to get the advantageous position on him just to shake him off, get
I was
behind
about
them
to
and
say
shoot
that. I was
them.
just about to say like the new Top Gun movie where he does Maverick does that shit. But yeah, there you go. That's the scene.
Down first, just to show them how good they're not. Just the complete dad energy of we're going to set a tone right now out of the gate. You're not that good. You're going to shut up. You're going to listen to what I have to tell you because it's the best chance you have at making it through this war that we have coming up. The dude is out there right now just breaking egos for a living until one day there's a new pilot that shows up. He's not particularly cocky, but he's highly regarded as one of the best they have. And Thatch wants to take him up in the air just to see what he has. And he does what he always does. He lets them get the advantageous position, except this young pilot by the name of Butch O'Hare is so good that Thatch can't shake him. Now, Thatch is a better pilot overall, but O'Hare is so close in talent to Thatch that if Thatch does give up the tactical advantage, he's not able to recover. After seeing how incredibly talented Butch is, Thatch decides to take him under his wing and becomes his mentor. So they train a ton. It's that Yoda and Luke, the Mickey and Rocky type relationship. And one of the things that they start doing is they start trying to address the issues that they know they're going to run into once the war starts. And the big issue right off the bat is Japan's new fighter plane, the Mitsubishi Zero, that came out in 1940. It is faster and more maneuverable than the Grumman F4F Wildcats by a long shot. Okay, this means not only does the Zero have the edge in combat, it also means that the F4F Wildcats can't really run away because the Zeros will just chase them down and shoot them out of the sky. So Thatch, being the tactical genius that he is, realizes the only chance they're going to have is to fight. This situation is kind of like when he first met Butch and took him up into the sky. Thatch is a better pilot than Butch. However, if he was able to give up that small advantage, he wasn't able to recover. He needs to find whatever that small advantage is that the F4F Wildcat has over the Zero so that he can enable his men to win. And what he comes up with is a tactic that would later come to be known as the Thatch Weave. It's basically a counterpunch because he knows the Zeros are going to end up behind the Wildcats. They're faster, they're more maneuverable. Once a Wildcat has a Zero on its tail, another Wildcat's going to pull up next to it, and then they're going to cross paths, and then they're going to cross paths a second time, kind of like a zipper. And right as they're about to cross paths the second time, the wingman is directly lined up with the broadside of the enemy Zero, and he's going to be able to open fire without running the risk of shooting down his friend. So it looks good on paper, but obviously he's got to see if it works in real life, so he calls upon his protege.
Yeah, it's like very timed, isn't it? It's very delicate that way. You really need to have like a precision, pilots like that.
Butch O'Hare to go up with a bunch of other planes to be the bad guys and try to chase down him and his guys where he can test the tactic. And it works out great. Butch was not able to shoot down any of them. The Thatch Weave would then be proven combat effective at the Battle of Midway, and it is still considered a viable dogfighting tactic to this day. During all this training, Butch would actually get some time off. He goes out, meets a young woman by the name of Rita, and on their very first date, he asked her to marry him, and she says yes, because Butch O'Hare doesn't miss. They then go, they have a honeymoon in Hawaii, they come back, and they start living together in Coronado, California, while VF3 is stationed at North Island Naval Center. And while he lived there, everything went great. He was training a ton, he was busy, but he did get to go home to his new wife every single night. And then one day, Thatch decided to make everybody in VF3 come in for extra training on what appeared to be a random Sunday in December of 1941. And they did their training in the morning. Thatch cut everybody loose for lunch, and they were supposed to report back to finish training that night. And as Butch O'Hare was driving to his apartment to meet up with his wife for lunch, over the radio he would find out that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. He gets home, he tells his wife, and I quote, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm to board the Saratoga as soon as possible. It's war." The very next day, the USS Saratoga and VF3...
Yeah, that is such an intense thing to say, right? Oh my God. Pearl Harbor was so... As soon as he said 1941, it's like, oh no, there you go. Turning point is coming. America's at war, right? It doesn't matter how much you try to imagine, doesn't matter how much you try to think about it, unless you're at the shoes, you don't realize the panic situation, like stressful situation. right? To the people who are going and to the people who are like left at home, the family, right? So it's full on war, right? First of all, when you say war, it's just like you know you have security layers, right? If you're sitting at your home, your security layers is your family, right? More than that, it's like you live in a city, police is a security layer. More than that, it's a country, all the establishment, that's a security layer. On war, your country is at war. You don't know what's going to happen. Is your country going to lose? Is going to win? So this is like war is such an intense thing if you're in that environment. Like, okay, your country is at war. One of your family members is going to fight a war. That's such a, when you really think about it, it's like such an intense thing.
Be set off from North Island to go participate in World War II. On their way there, the world would find out about Wake Island, where 450 Marines and 1,200 civilian construction workers fought off the Japanese on a small coral atoll that the Japanese wanted to use as a forward operational base. In the initial defense of Wake Island, the Marines and the construction workers were able to sink 2 enemy destroyers and a submarine, repelling their entire force, and this is looked at as America's first victory over Japan, and it was a silver lining that the entire country looked to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Because of this, America would immediately send ships to reinforce Wake Island. However, the ships that were leaving Pearl Harbor had a humongous head start. Amongst the American ships making their way there was Butch O'Hare and the USS Saratoga, as well as the rest of VF-3. Unfortunately, the American leadership would come to the realization that they were not going to be able to beat the Japanese there, and they didn't want to risk losing any more ships than they already had in Pearl Harbor, and they were ordered to back off and not try to save the Marines and the construction workers at Wake Island. After 2 weeks of fighting, the Marines and the construction workers were forced to surrender. Those that did not die in combat were either executed or held as POWs for the remainder of World War II. Because of how brutally the Japanese treated the civilian construction workers, the American government realized that they couldn't rely on civilian contractors to do all their construction on forward operational bases in the future. And this is where the Navy's construction battalion was originally founded, aka the Seabees. And those civilian construction workers that were at Wake Island are considered to be America's first honorary Seabees. During the same time, the USS...
I saw that video about Seabees, about how like they basically just take train. That's insane. That story is insane, right? And also like the Wake Island thing. Every time like you just like every time I see any American thing like it's a military navy, one thing I noticed, like they try to go outside of the book, right? This is how you're supposed to do it. They try to find more innovative things, even if chain of command doesn't want them to do it, and they somehow pull some like really like intense shit, right? Like something like nobody would even think about to should we do that, should we not? They just like on the field while bullets are flying all around, they just do shit. That's insane. If I was somewhere and the bullets are flying everywhere, I won't be able to think, let alone do anything.
Saratoga would be crippled by an enemy torpedo, and VF-3 would have to rotate and now be stationed on the USS Lexington. Once there, it is the Lexington's mission to penetrate deep into enemy territory so they can attack the port at Rabaul. They get like 450 miles away, and all of a sudden, a Japanese recon plane spots them. So they send some fighters up. Thatch himself shoots down this enemy recon plane. But he didn't get to him fast enough because they got that radio transmission out, and the Japanese bombers are already on the way to hit the USS Lexington. They start getting fighters up in the air as fast as they can as 9 Japanese G4M Betty bombers show up, and some of the fighters are already starting to engage the bombers, shooting them down. And Butch O'Hare is the last man slotted to get up in the air. He's sitting there on the flight deck in his Wildcat, fully fueled up, as the bombers are coming in, getting attacked by the other Wildcats, and he's just waiting his turn to get up in the air, hoping that the bombers don't make it and bomb the USS Lexington with him right on top of it in a fully fueled up aircraft. By the time Butch gets up in the air, the combat's basically over. The bombers have been repelled, and most of the Wildcats are still chasing them down, and they end up shooting down all of them. And then a second wave of bombers gets detected on radar, and this is a humongous problem. You see, all the Wildcats are up in the air, and most of them have been in the air so long that they're out of ammo and fuel, and once those planes return from chasing down that first wave, they're going to have to land. They're not going to be able to fight. By the time that second wave gets close, the only planes available with fuel and ammunition able to fight are Butch O'Hare and the guy that went up right before him, Duff DeFillo. So what do? They do the only thing they can do. Butch and Duff get next to each other, and they are about to engage 9 Japanese bombers in a double V formation, and Butch fires his guns just to make sure they're all working, standard procedure. Duff goes to fire his. All of them are jammed. So Duff's out. It is now Butch O'Hare versus an entire formation of Japanese bombers all by himself. He's already...
Hold on, half of the video's left. What, it's... The half of the video just gonna be about like detailed description of him like shooting these planes or something? Or there's gonna be he's gonna shoot another, I don't know. Such a layered story, right? Or from all the way to Al Capone. I even forgot that this is about military one when he was talking about Al Capone and criminals. Like, yeah. But then I realized, wait a minute, this is about something about like shooting planes in a war.
Already running low on fuel, and he only has enough ammunition for 10 3-second bursts with his guns. He does not have enough ammunition to take down all of these planes, and even if he did, he doesn't have the time to do it all by himself. He needs to be as accurate as humanly possible, and that's exactly what he does. Using his expertise in gunnery, he is engaging engines and fuel tanks, and that is it. On his first pass, he manages to knock 2 bombers out of the formation. He then immediately goes into a second pass, engaging the first bomber he sees on the other side of the formation, critically damaging it as well, forcing it to drop its bombs early and peel away. He then engages the next bomber next to it, striking the fuel tank, causing it to blow up in midair. He immediately goes into his third pass, shooting down another 2 bombers before making his fourth pass, engaging another one. And while this is happening, the crew of the USS Lexington is just watching in awe as it unfolds before them. The admiral on board said, and I quote, "All of us on the flight deck and the bridges became so intent watching the aerial battle that it was hard for us to concentrate on our duties. At the time, the entire ship's company burst into cheers as our fighter shot the bombers down into the sea. It was not as though they were in the midst of a life or death struggle, but at a baseball game." After his fourth pass, Butch was completely out of ammunition and almost out of fuel.
Yeah, I say that a lot, but that is so Hollywood, right? It's like Tom Cruise in Top Gun Maverick or some shit, right? Just like shooting down plane, everybody just like watching Boss music plays in everybody's mind.
Remaining Japanese planes dropped their bombs and all of them missed.
All right! That wasn't so hard.
In the span of 4 minutes, Butch O'Hare had pulled off the impossible, going toe-to-toe with an entire Japanese bombing formation, and during that time, he was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. The entire bombing formation, returning fire on Butch, managed to hit him with a total of 1 bullet. Butch was engaging the enemy so quickly from so many different angles that one of the surviving Japanese pilots said, and I quote, "Enemy planes swirled around us, zooming, banking, diving, attacking us from all directions, not realizing that it was one man."
Maybe one man.
So the 4 remaining Japanese planes that dropped their bombs and missed, they peel off, they retreat. Butch goes to land, and as he goes to land, he drops his landing gear, and some new guy on the deck opens fire on him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Luckily, it was all misses. Butch gets out of his Wildcat, walks up to the guy that was just shooting at him. It's some new kid that is now just shitting his pants because he almost just killed the hero of the day. And Butch walks up completely cool and he's like, "Son, I don't mind if you shoot at me. Just try not to do it with my landing gears down." Which is probably the politest way of calling this kid an idiot to his face imaginable, considering that he just shot at him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Like, "Hey kid, if a plane has its landing gear down and you're on an aircraft carrier, it's probably trying to land on you, meaning it's not an enemy. Why would you shoot at me?" Okay, now that the immediate threat is over, this has been like 30 minutes of straight chaos. We've got to figure out what all happened, where everybody's at, if they're okay. We have to...
Can you imagine if he actually shot him down? His own people with a 50 caliber? How insane. It's just like, this suddenly turns into a Family Guy episode if that shit happens.
Get the planes ready in case there is another attack. There's a lot of stuff to do. So Butch, all the other pilots, and pretty much everybody else that would have seen anything goes in to get debriefed so the chain of command can try to figure out what all happened in this very busy couple of minutes. So Butch goes in and says, "You know, I shot up 7 of those planes really good. I'm pretty sure I downed 6 of them." To which the captain of the USS Lexington is like, "Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and only credit you with 5 because after you pulled off after your last run, there was still 4 bombers in the air that dropped their bombs, and there was originally 9 to begin with. I do think that you shot down the other 5 though, because, well, pretty much everybody saw it happen." So now Butch has officially been credited with downing 5 enemy planes. This makes him an ace pilot and the first naval aviator ace of World War II. And at first, Butch doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't regard himself as being special. He doesn't think what he did was incredible. He thought he did exactly what anyone else in VF3 would have done if they were in the exact same situation. As far as Butch O'Hare is concerned, the only thing about that day that was unique to him was that he happened to be in the right place at the right time. He wasn't necessarily the right guy. And then he came out of getting debriefed, and the crew of the USS Lexington had already went down to the machine shop.
Yeah, I mean, imagine you're in World War II, right? I mean, now with the hindsight, when we think about ACs and all this, but at that time, where you know, like, war is full-blown start, right? Battle like that is happening everywhere, right? So obviously, at the moment, he wouldn't realize, like, how incredible that was. It's like, probably people are doing the same thing everywhere else. It's a major war, right? Shit like this is gonna happen a lot. That's what his mentality is at the time.
shop and made him a trophy. He was everybody's best friend. He was the hero of the day that had saved the USS Lexington, and everybody was in love with Butch O'Hare, America's first ace. The crew of the USS Lexington and the rest of VF3 actually adopted a new drinking song that night as well. It goes something along the lines of, "O'Hare, O'Hare, did the Japanese bombers go? O'Hare, O'Hare, could they be?" Okay, now sidebar, in the spirit of full disclosure, retroactively after World War II, it has been decided that Butch O'Hare actually only shot down 3 enemy bombers on that day. Apparently this is because the Japanese documented that actually only 3 planes were shot down during that wave, 3 of them returned back severely shot up, and 1 of them apparently got lost in a storm.
You sure about that?
Okay, and this is where I get annoyed, because on one hand, like, yeah, okay, I understand wanting to figure out the truth and clarify things, but also I feel like Americans typically tend to believe what the enemy says happened more than they believe the word of their own men. I mean, when the captain of the USS Lexington looks up in the sky and he's like, 1, 2, 3, there's 4 left, the rest were shot down. I don't know why we're not believing that guy. Why are we believing the Japanese documentation over that? And don't get me wrong, I understand that people make mistakes and maybe the captain miscounted, maybe the entire crew that was...
I think the whole, American point of view and like any democratic country point of view always is like best to take, like the least approach. I don't know how else to say that. Basically, so if Japanese says something, if Japanese says 3 planes, it is at least 3 planes, right? Because they are the last people to exaggerate. Even though it goes the other way, like they might like say less number than it was, like 3 instead of 5 or something, right? But that's what democratic countries' mentality is. Like take the approach of like the at least is this. If Japanese is saying 3, at least is 3. It could be 5, but at least is 3. And basically something like that.
Was also watching had a bad account of what happened, because the enemy never ever makes mistakes, just like the enemy that was under the impression that he was getting attacked by multiple planes all at once and they were everywhere all over the place, when in reality it was just Butch up there by himself. Okay, and I know this is crazy and I'm definitely biased, but I'm always going to be more inclined to believe the guys on my team than the enemy. But hey, whatever, I'm not the expert, that's one thing, whatever. Maybe everybody on the USS Lexington miscounted and the Japanese counted right. I guess that is possible. However, I will argue till I die that the Japanese pilot that got shot up by Butch O'Hare and then magically got lost in a storm that none of the other shot up planes managed to get lost in absolutely got shot down by Butch O'Hare, okay? I don't care if the storm did the last 5% of the damage, Butch should get credit for that, okay? It's complete lunacy to say anything other than that. I mean, for real, apply this logic to any other situation. Imagine that you're at a party and there's an altercation that breaks out between guy A and guy B, and guy A pulls out a gun, shoots guy B in the chest 17 times, and then guy B falls into the pool, okay? Are we gonna be like, oh, that guy drowned? No, guy A killed guy B, okay? That's obvious. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I get super annoyed when there's some people that have nothing better to do with their lives and look back and retroactively nitpick and try to undermine the accomplishments of others. Honestly, Butch O'Hare probably wouldn't even care this much because all he cared about was saving his dudes, but also he's a better man than I am, so whatever, moving on. Anyway, so over the next couple of days, things kind of return to normal-ish. However, the USS Lexington is still on mission. They're still making their way to Rabaul so they can attack this port. And then once they get there, they start launching raids. Now, Butch is pumped. He wants to get back up in the air. He wants more combat. That's what he's here for, right? However, it gets decided by Thatch that Butch and Duff are to stay at the USS Lexington while everybody else goes out and conducts raids. And the theory behind that was, or at least the stated theory as to what Thatch told O'Hare was, hey, we're leaving you guys to defend it because we know if everything goes bad, you two by yourselves can defend the USS Lexington against anything. That's what Thatch told him. In reality, Thatch knew that Butch O'Hare was being put up for the Medal of Honor, and so did the rest of the chain of command, and they knew that they could not afford to let Butch get killed in combat. Okay, this is early 1942. This is 2 months after Pearl Harbor. The only silver lining, the only good news that America has gotten in the past 90 days was about the Marines and the construction workers making their last stand at Wake Island, and now they've all been captured, either killed or put in internment camps. Okay, America has not had any good news, except now they have the story of Butch O'Hare, the man that became an ace in 4 minutes. Shortly after this, Butch is informed that he's going to be...
That is also pretty important, right? I mean, obviously, people have to like, okay, we are going to keep you in reserve because you can single-handedly kick everybody's ass. Kinda, but that's not the reason, because they want him alive because of the, a lot of like image things, right? You need morale. There's many things happen in the background as well as battlefield that is important. right, for morale and everything. So people who are fighting, right, they just want to get out there, right, do their thing, protect the soldiers and everything. So they're not gonna see this picture. So obviously, chain of command sometimes has to play games like that. But yeah, that is also important, right? Big picture. So morale is pretty important. We've seen that, like a Wake Island video and everything. Like there is a real thing, right? There was also another video where I think Vietnam video, right? Vietnam, was it Vietnam? No, wait a minute. Was it Vietnam in World War II? I don't know which one was that. One of the fighters video where like their news became such a big thing in US, and it just, yeah, that was a morale thing. Something like that, you need that.
Be receiving the Medal of Honor, to which he directly tells Thatch, I don't want it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to have to go back stateside. He wants to stay out there with his men. He still does not feel as though he did anything special. And the man that has been his father figure, his mentor for the past couple of years, basically pats Butch on the shoulder and informs him, too bad. Deal with it. You're a hero now. Now you got to go do that, because that's ultimately what's going to be the best for this war effort. And with that, Butch is sent back home stateside, where there is both a literal parade for him when he arrives, and he is then metaphorically paraded around the country, conducting interviews, doing anything he can to boost the morale of the American people and the military in the wake of Pearl Harbor. During this metaphorical parade, he makes his way to the White House, where he is awarded the Medal of Honor by FDR, and his very own wife, Rita, is the one that gets to put it around his neck. And all of this is because he was just some fat kid from St. Louis that wanted some donuts, but also didn't want to walk very far to get them. And honestly, he's still that fat kid at heart. He's never been the star athlete. He's never had everybody looking at him. He's never stood in the spotlight for this long. And during this time, he is described as modest, humorous, inarticulate, very nice, and more than a little embarrassed by the entire affair. So he gets paraded around the country helping to sell war bonds until about June of 1942. Then VF3 is actually set to come back to Hawaii for some R&R. And while there, VF3's commander, John Thatch, is set to get a promotion and move on and advance his naval career. And he is going to be replaced by none other than his protege and war hero, Butch O'Hare. On June 19th, 1942, Butch O'Hare formally relieves John Thatch of command of VF3 as he assumes command himself. John Thatch would then go on to say, and I quote, I know of no one I would rather see take my old command into new battles. Of course, referring to Butch O'Hare, and this meant more to Butch than winning the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Butch was going to get to go back into combat. VF3 had actually been taken, and they are now going to be training all of the new pilots to get ready for war, because America's practice at this point in time was to save all of our best pilots and make them teachers to train the next generation, as opposed to the Japanese who, well, they used up all their good pilots.
They all died.
I was just about to say that, like, opposed to Japanese who just, like, all the veterans are dead, now just throw people at, like, throw rookies at people at kamikaze or some shit.
So Butch and the remaining combat veterans of VF3 start training a bunch of new guys, and Butch officially becomes known as the King of Maui. Because, I mean, he's the war hero, everybody knows his name, he's training all the new guys, he's in charge. This guy is clearly the main character. And this is an important time because he's training the next generation of fighter pilots that he'll eventually take into combat, but he also gets to go home every night and spend time with his wife. And during this period, they end up having their daughter, Kathleen, that he gets to meet in March of 1943. With Butch leading all the training, VF3 became known as Butch's Boys, and a lot of these pilots went on to become aces themselves, and they all had incredible things to say about Butch and the lessons that he was able to pass on to them. Then in August of 1943, VF3 was reinstated as VF6, and they were being stationed on the USS Independence, and they were being sent back into the Pacific Theater for combat. But unlike last time, Butch isn't going to have a plane that's outmatched by Japanese Zeros, because him and his men are not getting Wildcats, they're getting the new Grumman F6F Hellcat. And I cannot stress to you enough what a big difference this is. The Wildcat is outmatched by Japanese planes. The Hellcat, on the other hand, will go on throughout the rest of World War II to rack up a 19-to-1 kill ratio. And now Butch and his boys got the new Hellcats, and they proceed to go and fuck shit up. First thing they do is they go and they launch raids on Wake Island and Marcus Island. Butch lands a couple of more air-to-air kills, solidifying his status as an ace, even if people like to go back in time and try to discredit some of his kills. Then VF6, now VF3, gets restationed onto the USS Enterprise, and Butch, the war hero, gets put in charge of all three squadrons on the USS Enterprise. Okay, here's the problem with that. Butch is now officially a bigwig. He's not supposed to be out there in a Hellcat mixing it up with the enemy anymore. He's supposed to be going up in like a Grumman Avenger, you know, a command plane, so he can...
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, okay, he's the one at this point, at this position, he's the one who's actually going there and doing all these things. But yeah, because obviously he wanted to something, right? But now he's gonna take more of a command position.
See everything, see what's going on, be protected, be safe, be the smart guy up in the tower telling the troops on the ground what to do. Okay, but that's not how Butch gets down, okay? He officially puts in a request that they repaint his Hellcat so that it can be his command and control vehicle, and he's gonna do everything from a Hellcat. And obviously, this is Butch O'Hare, the war hero and fighter ace. He's gonna get what he wants, and he does just that. Now with Butch O'Hare in charge of over 100 pilots on the USS Enterprise, they go and provide air support to the Marine Corps as they make amphibious landings at Tarawa and Macon Island. And with the help of the new Hellcats, they absolutely crush the Japanese in daytime combat, so bad that the Japanese have to ditch the idea altogether. After the Japanese realize they can no longer go toe-to-toe with the American aviators during daylight, they resort to using night tactics. Basically, the Japanese resort to sending torpedo bombers out in the dark of night, launching torpedoes and hoping they hit American ships. Now, it's not super effective because the torpedo bombers can't really aim. However, it's also effective in that the Americans also can't really send planes up to stop them because
That is so insane. Blindly just like sending them. So randomness, right? Making the seas even scary. Just like randomly Japanese just gonna bomb the shit out of things. Maybe it will hit American ships. Who knows?
night fighting at this point in time isn't really a thing. Okay, you gotta realize this is 1943. Radars are still fairly new technology, and they're mostly being used on ground arrays, and recently they're starting to be used on big naval vessels. They can't cram one of these things inside of a fighter plane yet. So at best, all the Americans can do is use the radar on the ship to see the enemies coming and then essentially brace for impact. They are not going to be able to scramble their own fighters to go up without a radar because everything's relative up there, right? Even if the ship tried to tell the planes where the enemy was, like, is that my left or your left? Is that my guy or is that an enemy? They'd end up shooting more of themselves down than they would the enemy. It'd be complete chaos. So that's really all the Americans can do is just hope they miss. That was until Butch came up with a plan. What if we took the Avenger, it's a big plane, we crammed a radar into that and then sent the Avenger up with a bunch of Hellcats, and then as long as we could stay in formation, we would be able to tell in relation to ourselves where...
Oh my god, did he just started the early warning radar type of shit? That is what kinda says it, right? Basically put radar on big ass plane and like keep the formation so we know where are our guys, where are the others coming.
The enemy was. The Avenger could be like the enemies to the left, the enemies to the right, and everybody has the same left, the same right. The Avenger could guide everybody. Now, obviously, if the entire thing devolves into a giant dogfight, we're going to have a huge issue, but we should be able to ambush them under the cover of night and stay in formation and hopefully not lose it. And we don't need to go chasing kills. We just need to prevent them from launching torpedoes at the ship. We just need to either shoot them down while maintaining our formation, or we just need to scare them off. So Butch gets permission from the chain of command. They shove a radar inside of a Grumman Avenger, and now he starts developing night fighting tactics, and his crew becomes known as the Black Panthers. So in November 1943, they go up for their first night mission, attempting to intercept Japanese bombers. They were unable to find the Japanese bombers at night. However, they didn't get to shoot off their torpedoes, and they got all the planes back on the carrier under the cover of night, so it was deemed a pretty big success. Then November 27th, 1943, they go up for their second night mission. There's 2 Avengers and 4 Hellcats divided into 2 different groups, and they are going to go up there and stop the Japanese bombers. By the time all the American planes get up in the air, the Japanese bombers are so close that the Avengers are having trouble differentiating the radar signatures between the Japanese bombers and the American Hellcats. And before Butch and his wingman can actually find their Avenger and get into formation, Butch's Avenger actually runs into the Japanese bombers first and opens fire. Even though it's not a fighter, it does have some guns, but it's not a lot. Regardless, they're able to shoot down one of the Japanese bombers. And then Butch's Avenger again somehow runs into another Japanese bomber before finding Butch and the wingman, and it shoots that one down too. At this point, it's chaos. There's multiple planes in the air, American and Japanese, and they're in close proximity and they don't know who is who. So Butch instructs his wingman and the Avenger to both...
This is equivalent to, which one was that? The submarine guy who basically took out the whole fleet by staying close to them, right? Because nobody can pick them up. This is equivalent of on the sky, right? Everybody's so close. But obviously, when you have radar in sky, but everybody's close, it's going to be chaos.
Turn on their cabin lights at the same time so all 3 of them can see each other for a brief moment and be able to get into formation. So they turn the cab lights on for a brief second, they all see each other, then they turn them back off right away. At this point, the crew of the Avenger spots a Japanese bomber above Butch approaching him from the rear, most likely attempting to shoot him down. They radio to Butch that he has somebody on his tail, and they radio to the other Hellcat to send them forward to take out the bomber. Butch's wingman in the Hellcat speeds up, intercepts the bomber, opens fire, and the bomber opens fire on Butch. The bomber takes heavy heavy damage and veers off into the darkness, at which point the crew on the Avenger radios, "Butch, we got him. Butch, we got him. Come in. Over." And there's nothing. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it is believed that the bombing crew got a lucky shot off that pierced Butch's canopy, killing him directly without heavily damaging his plane. It is the only thing that would explain why he didn't radio that he had been hit. Despite extraordinary efforts, his remains were never recovered and he was declared dead 1 year later. In addition to Butch O'Hare, 6 more American pilots would give their lives conducting carrier-based night operations during World War II, utilizing his plane. It is the only thing that would explain why he didn't radio that he had been hit. Despite extraordinary efforts, his remains were never recovered and he was declared dead 1 year later. In addition to Butch...
Hold up there. Didn't you say his plane didn't get that much damage, but just like probably somebody got lucky? His plane got sunk or something? That is one of those like X-Files type of shit. Not Aliens, but not X-Files. What would you say? Like, you know, the mysterious things, like how a flight disappeared, shit like that. Like, when did he get a lucky shot, right? Suddenly later, no remains were ever found. A year later, he was declared. I mean, I know shit like this happens, but damn. Entire story was so insane all the way to the end, but then you realize, wait a minute, this is not Hollywood, this is real life. Reality hits you in the face directly. This is so fucked up.
Butch O'Hare, 6 more American pilots would give their lives conducting carrier-based night operations during World War II, utilizing the techniques that Butch O'Hare had helped develop. Those missions are credited with downing 103 Japanese planes that otherwise would have been able to attack defenseless American ships. Butch not only saved lives through his direct actions in combat, but through his expert training of the next generation of naval aviators in World War II, and his help developing groundbreaking techniques like the thatch weave and carrier-based night combat. In conclusion, this is why the airport in Chicago is known as O'Hare International Airport. It's named after a famous man named Edward O'Hare. And no, not the famous mafia lawyer that had ties to Al Capone and was famously assassinated, but rather his son, the man that overcame the sins of his father to become one of the greatest war heroes in American history. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
Lieutenant O'Hara, tell us about what happened in the Pacific that February afternoon.
We were out there and we ran into a bunch of these Jap bombers. And we think we did pretty good with them.
Are you thinking of yourself or hitting the other fellow?
Well, you don't have much time to think about yourself. The main thing you worry about is whether you can stop them before they get to your ship, because if you don't, why, you won't have any place to go when you do finish up.
That is so good, right? It's like he's one of those people who's just like expert at something. Even in sports, you see this, like somebody who's like really good, and just like some interview asks some kind of questions. It's like, what do you want me to say? Like, I did this. What? You know, you had any time to think? Yeah, we didn't have any time to think. We just, I did this. It's like, this is so good, man. Man, the end was like, I don't know why I hope for the ending's gonna be somewhat good, because usually that does happen in Patterson stories. But yeah, like, this is reality, not a fucking Hollywood. But yeah, this is so insane, right? And only in America, this type of stories. You know, father who's like gangster, let's just say, not gangster, but criminal, associated with gangster, not just any gangster, Al Capone, right? Associated with him, becomes a big name from the news and everything. And his son becomes a big thing, but for many different reasons, right? Complete 180, which is so insane, man. A very important figure when it comes to like aviation and things, right? The ending was like kind of like, I don't know, like remains were never found. Was there a foul? I don't know, my mind always goes, was there some kind of a foul play or something? I don't know, some kind of espionage. I don't know, that kind of shit's not gonna happen here, right? I mean, no. But then again, it's just like, if he was just shot down, like, yeah, here's his remains, he was shot down, makes sense, but his remains were never found. A year later, he was declared dead. I don't know. But yeah. Right, well, that was American pilot Obliterates 5 enemy planes in 4 minutes. Edward Butch O'Hare, Butch Patterson. If you like my reason, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.